love it. It's all grist for the mill.
Well, this is Pete Horobin in the Data Attic, and today is the 18th of February 1986, and the time is 23:02. I'm dedicating this attic anecdote to DJ and Jack Saunders. Well, this particular story happened after I'd left art school and I was living in the attic with Barry Mitchell. Barry at that time was a very keen outdoor enthusiast. He used to take off for the weekends into the Highlands of Scotland at the greatest opportunity, or the easiest opportunity. I think this occurred, it must have been during the winter time, I think, around about 1976. Barry had disappeared for the weekend, and I was living in the flat on my own. And I think it was a Sunday evening. The doorbell went, and I went to the door, and there were two very tall, well-built guys standing there, clad in rucksacks and outdoor equipment, hiking boots, jeans and duvet jackets. Well, duvet jackets make a person look rather stout anyway. Add rucksacks to that kind of Michelin type figure and you get quite a hulk, especially when your ceiling is only about 7 foot high. They filled the doorway, the two of them. More than filled the doorway, the two of them. They introduced themselves as being a pair of Australians who were on holiday, and they'd met Barry on the road to Aviemore. And of course, Barry, being Barry, ever the friendly Good Samaritan type, had invited these two Australians to look into the attic when they passed through Dundee. Well, that they had done, and of course they'd beaten Barry to it. So I asked them in, and we sat down in the kitchen. They introduced themselves as being Ted, and I can't remember the other guy's name. But they explained the circumstances. They'd explained how they'd met Barry on the road to Aviemore, and how he was expected to arrive back here before them. Well, Barry in fact did arrive back. I made a meal for everyone, and after the meal we headed up to the old tavern on the Hawk Hill. Now, the tavern on the Hawk Hill in those days was like an art college social club. It was the art college union without being an authorized union, if you know what I mean. Everybody from the art school and all the arty-farty types in Dundee hung around the Tav, because that's where drugs were pushed, and that's where lots of parties were announced. It was a kind of very, what would you say, bohemian kind of atmosphere, very 60s atmosphere. A cramped, sweaty dive, which just seethed with humanity at the weekends and just about every evening. So we took the Aussies up to the Tav and got tore into some beer. Barry and I drank a lot in those days. I guess my capacity was 10 pints a day at least. So the Australians had been boasting about how they were heavy drinkers and how they could handle booze and how they had wild times in Aussie and all the parties they had in the outback, how they used to disappear into the bush over the weekends and screw women and fuck kangaroos and shag sheep and demolish gallons of Australian lager, down in their tubes of Forsters, swatting flies, telling lies. Just a whole lot of bullshit, I guess. Well, by the time we got back down to the attic, we were quite pissed. Pissed and merry, I think, really. Barry and I were getting into high spirits, and the Australians obviously had had a couple of pints too many. They were feeling a bit groggy and tired. So we got down to the attic, and if I remember rightly, we had a carry out of a few cans or something like that, which we drank. And then the Aussies retired to the spare room, the sitting room, the living room, which was across the corridor from the kitchen. Now the two adjoining doors were left open when the Aussies retired, so we were kind of shouting banter back and forwards to one another. And the Aussies curled down in their sleeping bags. Well, by this time Barry and I had managed to find a bottle of whiskey, and I can't remember where it had got uncovered from, whether it had been in the flat for medicinal purposes or whether we'd bought it in the pub and brought it home with us. But I can clearly recall drinking this bottle of whiskey and getting quite smashed. And the merriment started to get more and more aggressive. Well, the two Aussies kind of shouted from the living room, "Ah, you two fuckers, are you gonna shut up or what?" Well, at that, the bottle was empty by this, and at that, I picked up the bottle and hurled it at the head of one of the Australians. Well, fortunately, it missed the guy's head. It hit the floor just in front of his head and bounced, and the bounce took it clean through one of the window panes, smash, and down 4 flights, smash, into Union Street. Well, fortunately, by this time of the night, it was probably about 2 in the morning or something, and Union Street was deserted, so no one got hurt, either with flying broken window or descending rapidly empty whiskey bottle. But we could clearly hear the crash in the street. Well, there was no more whiskey, and Barry and I were quite paralytic but mischievous, kind of champing at the bit, full of energy, just wanting to demolish something. So we started to demolish one another. I can remember, I don't remember how the fight started. I guess it was one of these inane arguments about art or some kind of bullshit. But I can remember the kitchen just being turned upside down. We used to have a kitchen cabinet, a tall thing, which had a cupboard at the bottom of it, a kind of hinged down metal covered bread board or chopping board kind of door, the cutlery drawer, and then above that a glass fronted cupboard. So it was a kind of 3-part kitchen cabinet. Well, I can clearly remember pulling that away from the wall and turning it over. I can remember the table getting upended and chairs getting swung about. This was a real kind of John Wayne style barroom brawl. We were lying on the floor, knocking shit out of one another, smashing one another with furniture, and not feeling a thing, and thoroughly enjoying it. I mean, this wasn't animosity or kind of bloodlust aggression. This was just good, friendly banter. This was how Scots fellas make love to one another, I guess. They just knock each other's heads about. Well, we were pissing ourselves laughing and wrecking things. And we finally realized what we were doing, I think, and stopped. But then, of course, this argument continued, and I said to Barry, "Ah, you're a shite sculptor anyway." You can't make sculpture. I mean, your sculpture's shit, man. I mean, it's just rubbish. Well, at that time, Barry made pretty heavy sculpture. I mean, he either made things out of railway sleepers, big lumps of lignum vitae, or welded metal. Well, there were various examples of Barry's sculpture in the flat. And, well, we started to demolish them. We just broke them apart, and Barry helped me. This was the irony of the whole thing. The argument had got to such a stage of ridiculousness that Barry was agreeing with my overzealous criticism of his work. And we made our way from the kitchen down the corridor into one of the spare rooms at the other end of the flat, breaking pieces of sculpture in our wake. Oh dear, just bits of debris lying strewn around. I mean, by this time it must have been about 3 o'clock in the morning. And the noise we must have been making must have been horrendous. We got to the other end of the flat where there was this large welded piece of painted metal resembling a very skinny totem pole or clothes pole or clays pole. It was painted canary yellow, this metal pipe, and it had a diameter of about two inches, and rising out of the top of it were two like antennae or eyes or something like insect eyes on a stalk. This thing resembled a canary yellow praying mantis. Well, I remember picking it up and smashing it and smashing it and smashing it until the welded protuberances snapped off. So it must have got a fair welly. And I don't know where the glass came from. I think there must have been a large storage jar in there full of sand and pebbles or something like that. But I remember that being smashed to pieces too, and there being sand and pebbles and glass and broken pieces of welded metal strewn about the floor. Well, that was the finale. That was the great climax to this night of boisterousness. I think the Australians were petrified. They must have been terrified. They didn't say peep, they said nothing. After the whiskey bottle had narrowly missed one of their craniums, they shut up. They curled down tight into their sleeping bags and stayed mum. Well, Barry and I retired. And when we woke in the morning, I remember waking up feeling like an ironing board. This wasn't unusual in those days, really, waking up feeling like an ironing board. Stiff, paralyzed from the base of the skull down. The head perfectly active, waking up with enough sugar in the blood to have a very stimulated brain. Waking up thinking, little fragments of the jigsaw puzzle being clicked slowly together. Not daring really to get up and look at the mess, the havoc, the debris. But then thinking, well, maybe that was a dream, maybe we didn't do that. And then getting up, getting dressed, and the pain and the stiffness in the limbs, and oops, that sudden surge of blood downwards by gravity, and some kind of aches, and a pounding in the skull, and God, don't bend down, and leaving my bedroom, which was at the end of the corridor, and there just being, yes, there it all was, broken glass, sand, pebbles, bits of metal. And then coming into the kitchen and the whole place just being like a bomb site, resembling that photograph that I remember of Cologne after the war, where there was only one building left standing, and that being Cologne Cathedral. Well, the kitchen was like that. I think there was probably only one piece of furniture left standing in the midst of all of this chaos. There was one Australian left, Ted. Ted, I think, was stupid enough to stay. Either that or Ted really had no bolt hole to run to. But his mate had fucked off sharp. He'd got up at 6 o'clock in the morning and naffed off. He had left to go to Switzerland or Austria for a skiing holiday. Like he had shot the bolt or shot the craw. Ted remained. Once we'd got everything re-established and the kitchen put back into normality, we were sitting round the table having breakfast, and a good laugh. Ted said, "Hey, I think you fellas are real gas. I think you guys are great. Can I stay here with you for a while?" And we kind of looked at each other and thought, oh fuck, we don't really want this guy here, you know. I mean, he's just gonna get in the way of things. But Ted was very pleading. Ted said that he would stay and do all the cooking, buy all the food in exchange for a bed and a room over and a roof over his head, and not a bed over his head. So he reluctantly said, yes, okay, you can hang on and just muck in. So Ted stayed, and Ted became the housemaid. We'd come home from the studio every night. By this time we had studios in Forbank, an old school that had been converted to studio space. We would work up there all day. We were on social security, so we were just painting all the time. Barry was painting at this time too. And we'd come home cold and tired, and Ted would have the meal ready. He was a real hash cooker. He called himself a chef, but he knew nothing about cuisine. I mean, he could cook, but cook the basic kind of rudiments of a meal. He put beer into everything. Omelets had beer in them. Boiled eggs were boiled in beer. His custard had beer in it. His coffee had beer in it. I think he probably brushed his teeth with beer-flavoured toothpaste. Anyway, Ted stayed for a while, and we used to take him out and get him drunk, and he would take us out and get us drunk. And we lived as a threesome for, I guess, around 3 months, 2-3 months. Ted used the attic as a base. He would go off. He would just get up and leave the attic about 12 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning with his rucksack on his back and his big duvet jacket on and his hiking boots, and clump off into the darkness. He would never know where he was going. He was quite intrepid, in fact, and I admired that quality in him. I liked the way that he would just get up and go and not know where he was going, and then come back about 4 days later and say that he'd been either in London, Swansea, Cardiff, Birmingham, Cornwall, or some remote part of the British Isles. Well, on one occasion he came back, I think, from Canterbury or Cambridge. I have a shrewd suspicion that it was Canterbury. He came back from Canterbury, towing a young lady in his wake. And she was Australian too, a cute little Sheila, you know what I mean? And she sussed out immediately that we were taking the piss out of poor old Ted. And, well, I don't think she liked us very much, but she stayed along with Ted, and the two of them lived in one of the spare rooms here. They kind of shacked up on the floor in their cute little old sleeping bags, and they played at possums, or they played at wallabies, or whatever the fuck these Australians play at.
But they were really cute little marsupial bastards. They were really into one another's pouches, you know what I mean, eh? Things got kind of thick and heavy. I can't remember Ted's girlfriend's name, but I think she talked him into leaving and going to live in Canterbury with her. But Ted apologized and said he was really sorry to leave. And he packed up his kitchen knives and his cans of beer and his rucksack and his duvet jacket and his hiking boots. And the two of them walked off into the sunset, never to be seen or heard of again. Well, the attic has gone through many phases of human drama. From studenthood, post-student times when I was a painter, working and exhibiting in Scotland, to the time when I took on the flat on my own. I think that would be around about 1978 I started to live here on my own. That was after Barry left and another guy had come and gone. And I started to make my art form more accessible, and I started to explore the mailing potentials, and I moved into the data project in 1980. And with the start of data, I discovered the great mail art network. I was drawn in, sucked in. It's a bit like a Hoover. You can't really say that mail art is a vacuum because it's so full of energy. It's like a big engine, a big kind of whirlpool, I guess. It's like a whirlpool. It's just a mass of energy, global energy, which you get drawn into and sucked along. And I can remember the very beginning when I was getting pulled into this mail art adventure, this great correspondence adventure. I was really thrilled. I was really excited by the whole potential of this thing, the fact that people would send you stuff. People sent me fantastic bundles of crap, I guess. I mean, you can't say that it had any kind of artistic quality other than the fact that it was screaming at you. I mean, it was just howling with wonderful kind of vitality, vim and vigor. Haha, vim through the mail. And well, the first people to get in contact with me were Robin Crozier, Peter Bilo, and Vittore Baroni. And I've just been going through all the Vittore Baroni material that I have here, which has been accumulating steadily, regularly since 1980. Well, Baroni really has shat the work out. That guy's quite a powerhouse, and I feel quite pleased that I am still corresponding with him and able to establish a room for him here. Well, the room's finished now. It's a very plain room. It's black and white and grey with a yellow lampshade, so that the light that's cast over this very plain interior is a pale yellow light, so it kind of softens the black and white in the evening, and it makes it rather pleasant, cool but warm at the same time. It's quite an inviting interior. So all of the work that I have of Vittore is now in the room there, so that people can come and just sit down and absorb this powerhouse, this little powerhouse that's been churning it out of Italy for 10 years now. Vittore has been working from Forte dei Marmi for 10 years in the mail. Well, Jack, you were saying that you'd been 10 years in the mail too. I did my first mail project in 1976. So I guess I've been mailing stuff for 10 years too, but it was only in 1980 when I got sucked into the great correspondence adventure. But the mail is such a great medium for carrying stuff. I suppose it's going to metamorphose into some kind of electronic network in a few years. I guess the mail will become more and more expensive and less accessible to everyone. And in fact, I guess they'll start to close down a lot of branch post offices and gradually phase out the whole network. Of course, by that time, the creative visionaries within society will have grasped a hold of computer terminals, telephone systems, facsimile machines, and the data that is sent will probably be just digitalized. It'll be electronic signals, which will be downloaded at the receiving end onto a VDU. And then if you want hard copy, then you just push the button and you can have as many paper peel-offs as you want. Well, that really is what we're moving towards now. So the mail art system, as we've been operating under for 10 years, will gradually decline, I guess, and just gradually fall away as civilization progresses, as man moves on to other forms of communication. There will always, however, be correspondence. Correspondence is more than mail art. Correspondence is more to do with this direct this direct form of communication, the kind of exchange that we're doing with these cassettes. That's correspondence. It's not really mail art. So I mean, we could be doing this over a telephone if we could afford to do it. I wonder how much it would cost me to pick up the telephone and phone direct to Delray Beach and talk for half an hour, tell you anecdotes, or even just to call up Northern Ireland and chat away for half an hour. Well, maybe one day the telephone calls will be cheaper than audio cassettes. By that time, of course, your telephone will be video linked, so you can chat away to a person and look at them at the same time. And then, of course, just send them images and screeds of information at the same time. Could have quite a ball in a few years, I'm sure. If we're all still alive, if I haven't snuffed it with a heart attack, if DJ hasn't coughed himself to death, and if Jack Saunders hasn't suffocated himself under several 100 tons of paper, the written word. Well, Jack, your writing seems to be going well at the moment, huh? A good play coming off the line now. So I wish you all the success with that. I think you'll get quite a buzz, quite a lift if you see your art form being acted live on a stage.
I mean, it's one thing to send somebody the written word and have them appreciate it, but to go to a performance of something that you've written, well, I think that must be quite an achievement, quite a sense of magic there, quite a sense of in-touchness. The live situation, people appreciating you live and the work that you've done. So that's about the end of this cassette. So I wish you both well, and look forward to hearing from you quite soon again. Well, I'll have some supper now and turn in for the night.
I love it. I love it. It's all grist for the